Red, Gold, and Bold is back at it here with you. Remember, if you catch us via the podcast, you can be a part of the conversation by joining us live Tuesday nights, 9:30 p.m. Central. With you as always, Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, NFL.com. Sam McDowell from the Kansas City Star. I'm Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. State of the Chiefs defense. We did the offense a couple of podcasts ago. Now we're taking a look at the Chiefs defense. Chris Jones, a regular at OTA. Should Jones feel pressure to do more in 25? Can George Karlaftis become a dominant force along the defensive line? Will the rookie D lineman make a difference? Which one? Does Nick Bolton's big contract change anything for this defense? How much does the defense feel the loss of Justin Reed? If the cornerbacks fall apart again, what will happen to this defense this year? Can this defense be elite? It's a term that Jeff Chadiha really, really likes when it comes to the Chiefs defense. We'll talk about it right now here on the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast.
You are listening to the Red, Gold, and Bold podcast, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Chiefs on planet Earth, breaking down the Chiefs like no one else can. Red, Gold, and Bold is hosted by Jeff Chadiha, Sam McDowell, and Soren Petro. Jeff Chadiha is a senior columnist and on-air personality for the NFL Network and NFL.com. Sam McDowell is a columnist for the Kansas City Star. Soren Petro is the afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. The Red, Gold, and Bold podcast is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here are the hosts of the Best Chiefs podcast, Jeff Chadiha, Sam McDowell, and Soren Petro.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Curtis. We do appreciate it as we get things rolling here. Talking defense. Oh, is that a tear I see in your eye, Jeff? The fact that we're talking the defensive side of the ball. You do love your defense, so let's dive right in. Let's talk about it. Chris Jones. How much is on Chris Jones? Only 5 sacks last year. Still graded great in all the metrics. In fact, if you go to the PFF grades, interior defensive lineman, tops on the board. But, we've heard some conversation this minicamp about getting home. That's been one of the things Joe Collins talked about, turning pressures into sacks. How much of this is on Chris Jones for this year?
A ton. I would say probably, maybe 60% of this defensive success is reliant on him having a good year. And maybe that sounds high. I'd love to go higher, but that would be unfair to him. But it feels like this defense has always played great when he's played great. And it hasn't been so good when he's had these lulls. And, I think last year for a guy like Chris Jones has to be a bit sobering because you obviously made a big point about wanting to get a big contract, and you got the big contract. But when the numbers don't match up, it's not like you're 25 and you can say, okay, I got 4 or 5 more years to get back to this level and show people what I can do. He knows how old he is, and he knows how hard it is to play football as you get older in this league, especially at that position. So I do think him being there at camp is an indication of how seriously he takes this, how aware he is of what he means to this team and where his career is at. And ultimately, there's no assurance that what we saw last year, he's going to improve upon that. And so I think it is a big deal.
Yeah. How about you, Sam? How much of this is riding on Chris Jones?
Well, a lot should be with the way they're paying him. I mean, you pay a defensive player at $30-some million, like a lot of it is. I think a lot of people in this podcast or listening to it will point to, hey, they played really well without him in Pittsburgh, which is totally true. Like, it was their second best pass defensive performance of the season. I don't think one game is a great indication of how things would look without Chris Jones
against Russell Wilson.
Yeah, I'll continue to beat this drum over and over again that Chris Jones had a good year last year. Sacks-wise, he had 5 sacks. His pass rush win rate was the highest of his career last year. Like, he was good at getting to the quarterback. Where you did see, like in 2018 when he had that streak and he was just incredible in 2018, what really improved there was his quick pressure rate. And that's the difference, I think, between pressures and sacks. When you pressure the quarterback so quickly that he can't just throw the ball away and he has no time to react at all, that's why teams look at quick pressure rates. And his quick pressures in 2018 were just off the charts good. Like, I think he had 10 more than any other interior line in the league. Last year, in every year since, he's been between 26 and 30. He gets about 1.5 of those quick pressures, those under 3-second pressures per game. That was right in line, again, with what it's been his whole career. So my point is that I think Chris Jones last year, if you're wanting an improvement from Chris Jones, I could totally understand you saying, okay, you get to the quarterback, you actually have to tackle the quarterback. Yes, he needs to improve at that. But expecting him to get to the quarterback more, this is who Chris Jones is. And Chris Jones last year was still really good in that area.
But I guess the question before Soren goes is what you're talking about worth $30 million a year? Because that's what he wanted. That's what they paid him. Is that really commensurate with what he's giving them?
If he continues to give you that, right? But yeah. I think that's the question that Soren and I had when they signed Chris Jones to this contract is, can you expect that level of Chris Jones once you start to move into the 31, the 32, the 33-year-old Chris Jones?
Yeah, I think, listen, had they hit on Felix Anudike-Uzomah, I don't think they're signing Chris Jones. I mean, I think Chris Jones was a reaction to, I don't want to say failures because, I mean, you miss on draft picks, right? It happens at times. But I if you're going to give that kind of money to somebody who's 31 years old, give it to someone who's one, athletic, first position, that's Chris Jones, and two, has performed at a very high level all along. So I don't hate the fact that they gave this contract to Chris Jones, but I think it is best to not be putting that kind of money on a guy at this age. And I think he is going to continue to have injuries as time goes along. I think he should feel pressure to perform. I think he does. I think that's why he's at OTAs, right? I feel confident he'll be in great physical condition. The question is, will he continue to be able to hold up? And
he looked in better. Sorry, but he looked in better shape. And I think he looks in great shape at the onset of every year. But I don't know that Chris Jones needed to lose weight, but he looked to me like a guy that maybe has lost weight this offseason.
How much? Like what? Like,
I don't know. Like 5 pounds. I'm just saying he does not look like a guy that 4 years ago when Chris Jones would come into camp, like you would look at him and look, he's still 6'5", 6'6". Like he still is a physical presence, but he looks thin to me. He does not look like a guy who has any extra fat on his body right now.
Chris Jones, I think it's fair to say, is in better shape every year he comes in. He always puts in the work. And I think that's one of the reasons why you don't mind giving this guy the contract, because he's always going to put in the work. And so, but I do think it is important. It's out of the ordinary for the Chiefs to be paying guys up into their 30s, right? Like it just is. And so it is something that I think he takes very seriously. I think takes his getting ready for the season very seriously. But I'm with Jeff. I think I love all the advanced metrics. And I do think if he keeps winning, if he keeps those win rates up, sacks are somewhat coincidental, right? Like, did you win when the quarterback was flushed towards you? And it's also a product of the other guys doing their jobs. Right? If he wins, but it's an easy escape because everybody else is getting mauled, it's a problem. But I do. Can the Chiefs win the Super Bowl if Chris Jones doesn't have a big year, Jeff? Let me put it to you that way.
No. I've said for years that this team's championship potential has always rested on Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones, and previously Tyreek Hill. And those were their 4 biggest stars. When their 4 biggest stars played at a high level, they won. And you can track that. You can see Chris Jones, tore apart the Bengals offensive line a few years ago in the AFC Championship game, and then got to the Super Bowl and made big plays in the Super Bowl against the 49ers, and it was nowhere to be found against the Eagles. Now, that was a whole different game this past Super Bowl, but I do think that he is a huge part of whatever success they hope to have. And I agree with you guys. He has played well, and he earned the right to have that contract, but they're having these conversations in other parts of the league. Cincinnati's having it about Trey Hendrickson. Pittsburgh's having it about TJ Watt. It's very hard with players of this caliber to always to think that it's always going to be good, and then you're going to see the obvious, okay, now we shouldn't pay him anymore. the decline is always more gradual and really more debilitating than people realize. And so for me, again, has he played great throughout his career? Yes. But can you trust that? Could this year be the year when you really see a lot of decline? Certainly.
Sam, what did you make of his comments today where he was very playful when talking about Trey Smith and saying, well, he didn't do it my way. He didn't follow.
I asked him about that. Yeah.
So do you see it as a guy who's just joking around, or do you see it as a guy who regrets what he did last year?
So we had this debate actually in the media room afterwards, because I think, look, I'll just say the way I took it. I took it as Chris Jones was just saying, hey, if you want to know how I would have played it, you already know the answer because you saw it play out. So I saw it as a guy who said, you have your answer, and that's still my answer. I also put everything Chris Jones says into the same category, which is I think it's whatever comes to his mind at the time when the question's asked. I don't think that we get Chris Jones at the podium who has spent considerable time ahead of time. Oh, I want to say this when I get to the podium. I want to say this. I want to say this. This is the thought that popped into my mind when you asked that question. So here's what I'm going with at this moment.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Jeff, does he's interesting in the sense that his technique is not always what you would teach, right? He plays high for one. It's one of the things that kind of takes him out of the run is because they can definitely get into his body because he kind of, I mean, you would never teach a kid this is how you need to rush, but he's very effective at kind of working a swim move into it and everything. Does that age worse? Is that going to become a problem? Yeah. It doesn't get lower. Will that make him get old? Whenever physically he starts to break down, will that create a faster drop off whenever that day comes?
Look, I think just as with Travis Kelce, it's very similar to Travis Kelce in that what separates those two guys from other players and made them great was abnormal agility and quickness for the position. Yeah. And that goes first. So guys like Calais Campbell can play until they're like 40 because they're not asked to go out there and get 15 sacks. It's a very different role that he's taking on, and he's going to do a lot of that dirty work. And Calais Campbell, by the way, is bigger than Chris Jones. He's like 6'8". But he knows his role. He's going to go in there and muck it up, and he'll get a sack every now and then, but he's going to do a lot of the dirty work that Chris Jones doesn't do. And so, I think it is a lot like, to me, it's like a basketball player who's really good at getting to the basket. Like once they lose their first step, it's a different game. And that's the thing that Chris Jones and Travis Kelce, it's not a coincidence that both those guys are talking about being in great shape, because when you get older, that's what you think is going to allow you to be faster is I'm going to be better conditioned, when in reality, we all lose that explosiveness first.
Sam, it sounds like Jeff is calling for more jump shots from Chris Jones. Missing the boat here?
Yeah, I was just going to put a quick bow on this, which is you asked the question about can they win a Super Bowl without Chris Jones? And that prompted me to think of the last Super Bowl they did win, where Chris Jones has 0 sacks in the game. And I think the 2 biggest defensive plays of the game are his pressures, where the 49ers have wide open receivers. They had one in overtime on 3rd down right before they have to kick a field goal. They've got an open receiver in the end zone. They can't get there because Chris Jones is in Brock Purdy's face already. That's why the pressure still matters. Would you rather have a sack? Absolutely. Like I've said multiple times, sacks statistically are typically drive-ending plays. So that is a big difference between a sack and a pressure result-wise. But that's why the pressure still matters a lot. And that's why that's the way Chris Jones still affects the game. They don't win that championship without Chris Jones in that game.
What chance do you give George Karlaftis of taking a step forward? And how important is it that somebody else, George Karlaftis would be the most obvious choice with 24 career sacks, that somebody else becomes elite, becomes a difference maker along that defensive line? Is it on George Karlaftis to become dominant?
Yeah, because he's the most successful of the bunch, right? He's the most accomplished. Got the highest draft status, right? I mean, outside of he was drafted earlier than FAU, right? So he's been the highest drafted player on that defensive line. So yeah, it is on him. And really, I am curious to see what kind of player he is this year, because I think that not only does Chris Jones feel that pressure, but I think all these guys feel that pressure. And you mentioned Joe Cullen putting it out there. We want to get quarterbacks on the ground. And so I think everybody on that line's got to be looking at themselves and saying, how do we do that? How do we get better? how to become more consistent. And for George Karlaftis, the edge rusher group, he is the de facto leader now. And so I think it is important for him to have a huge year. And I just don't know if he's that kind of player. I think he's more somebody just threw out Tamba Hali. I think Tamba Hali was more sophisticated, more technically sound. I think Karlaftis is more of a hustle, get you to the ground type player, which is fine when you've got other guys creating pressure. But when you don't have that, you can disappear. And so he's got a lot on his plate too.
I mentioned Chris Jones, rated the number 1 interior defensive lineman last year by Pro Football Focus. 38th on the edge is where George Karlaftis came in last year, according to Pro Football Focus. How important is it for him to take a step forward, Sam?
Yeah, I think it is, but I also think that he did take a step forward last year. Jesse Newell for the Star was the first one to point out that late in the year, his get off was much quicker than it was earlier in the year. And the thing I looked at, when Jeff posed this question for our podcast, was his pressure percentage. He had one time in his first 12 games where his pressure percentage was better than 10%. 1 in 12 games. Then in his last 4 regular season games, he went 13%, 21%, 14%, and 12%. All of them were at least at 12. He'd only done that one time. In the playoffs, he went 12%, 24%, 13%. Like, we saw the leap from George Karlaftis. And I think this happens with a lot of players. When the leap comes midstream or mid-year, we don't tend to notice it quite as much as we do when it happens, straight from week 1. If he plays like that, like he did in his last 4 regular season and 3 playoff games, that's I think it'll wake people up to the fact that he did take this step forward at the end of the year last year. And so, yeah, can he be more effective? I think he was more effective late in the year than he was early on.
Do the Chiefs need to get him signed before this year takes off, Jeff? I mean, that would be the Eagles' move. It's what they've done with some of their players. Like, I don't think he'll ever be cheaper than he will be right now. Somebody in the chat room mentioned, right here. Terry says, could Chiefs afford to extend Karlaftis? Edge rushers getting more expensive. Generally, when you extend him, you can bring down the front end of it, right? If you want to backload it, the Chiefs can do that. But is it time to get him paid? Like, based upon Sam's stats, okay, the arrow's pointing up as the season ended. Does that mean the paycheck should be going up and they should get this done the same way the Eagles have done it with their young players?
Well, it depends on a couple things, right? How much is George Karlaftis looking at that market for edge rushers and saying, I want a piece of that? It's not just about, like Nick Bolton wanted to be here and obviously was willing to wait, but linebacker is a whole different position and market than it is for edge rushers. When you're talking about the top of that market being 40 million plus, and with Micah Parsons getting ready to push that up even higher, like, I'd be curious to see what the Chiefs would put in front of him at this stage, because I don't think it would be even 30 million a year. I think it would be a much discounted deal, and that's what can affect negotiations in a way that makes players think, okay, I want to sit and wait, because really he has the luxury of knowing that Trent McDuffie is in the same spot. And when you got 2 guys at high positions, it's probably better for both to see who goes first, to see if I'm going to end up being franchised or not. If I'm not, then I'm walking out of here and getting a chunk of that market. And so I think for him, it's a much different. I don't think he's going to sign early unless he's just crazy.
Sam, important to get him paid?
I don't think so, because I think this is going to be a situation, when we've talked about this on this podcast, where you're going to have, because Rashee Rice is a year behind, but he's a 2nd-round pick. He doesn't have that 5th-year option. You're going to get in a spot where you're talking Rashee Rice, Trent McDuffie, and George Karlaftis at one time. And potentially their contracts getting expensive simultaneously as well. Now, Travis Kelce, we assume, is going to come off the books next year. This Chris Jones contract just accelerates, even as the cap accelerates, like that deal does too. So that's not getting any cheaper. I think, to Jeff's point, like, let's say you can go off just the stats from what George Karlaftis has been 3 years. I don't think now would be a terrible time to have the conversation with him because of those stats I just mentioned. I think you do see a player that's improving, while I think his ceiling is limited. But are you paying for the potential? Are you paying because of the edge rusher market? And the evidence in the NFL is overwhelming that, yes, you do have to overpay when guys hit free agency. And I think you drafted a position with Ashton Gelati already here. And when you get the extra year with the 5th-year option, I might want to see what I have in that player first before I decide that I have to pay another player there already.
And oh, by the way, you just overpaid your middle linebacker, your guard, and your center.
Yeah.
Like, you can't keep overpaying everybody to keep them.
But the quarterback's fine. He'll never want any extra money. So, you got that going for you, right? That's a big part of the equation. Listen, when it comes to paying, you'll pay big problems. If you don't have a brightly striped lot, GAN Asphalt and Concrete can take liability off the plate. And, of course, they're one of our great sponsors here at the Red, Gold, and Bold. GAN Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the greater Kansas City area. Nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Locally owned and making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Let GAN educate you about the most cost-effective way to solve your parking lot problems. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warning. GAN Asphalt keeps your parking lot safer and helps you and your business avoid unnecessary delays and costly expenses. Find GAN online at GANasphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. GAN Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot.
Big moves, bigger vibes. If you haven't heard, Besame Wellness is now Suede Cannabis. Our colors and name may have changed, but you'll still experience the same great service on top of better deals, longer hours, and faster delivery. Smithville, Liberty, Kansas City, Warrensburg, and North Kansas City. No matter which location you visit, you'll feel right at home. Find the location nearest you and shop online at SuadeCannabis.com. Life should be dope. Let's make it happen. Suede Cannabis.
Northland Injury Law, Kansas City's Google 5-star rated personal injury lawyers, serving KC for more than 40 years, voted Kansas City's #1 accident lawyers, helping people with serious injuries from car accidents, work accidents, falls, and other personal injuries. Northland Injury Law doesn't get paid unless they get money for their client. Don't wait, get compensated now. If you have a case, text HURT to 22222. That's HURT to 22222 or call 816-400-HURT. That's 816-400-4878. The choice of a lawyer is an important one and should not be based solely upon advertisements. All right, how about the rookie defensive lineman, Jeff? OmarrNorman-Lott, Ashton Gelati, who Sam already mentioned. How important is it that one of, if not both of those guys make an impact?
Well, I think obviously Norman-Lott is more impactful just because of the lack of depth at that position. They don't have a number of difference makers. But I think Gelati's the more intriguing player because if he can show a lot this year, it does affect what we were just talking about. It does affect, okay, do we need to pay George Karlaftis now because we got a guy who can step in there and fill that role? He's a similar type of player. I think you're right. I think the FAU situation, I think we all agree that probably the ship has sailed on him being a good player for this franchise. But his lack of production has opened the door for other players to step in. And I know that, look, they've got Mike Dana and they've got Menahue, and I think that's pretty much it. But I imagine this kid, if Gelati can come in and play, he can make a huge difference maker because that kind of player, if he's a little more athletic than Karlaftis, a little more consistent earlier on, I think there's opportunities to make a lot of sacks.
How important, Sam? You mentioned Ashton Gelati. You're talking about him replacing George Karlaftis, maybe giving him an easy, cheaper out on giving a bunch of money to George Karlaftis. How important is it that one of those guys step up, whether it's this year or long term?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I look at what they have at the defensive line and think the replenishments have to come from the draft, and particularly when you eat up a second and third round pick, that they've got to produce because the playing time is going to be there for both of these guys. I think OmarrNorman-Lott's going to play. Let's say this: if he's not injured, I know he's going to play more than he played in college, and like that's an adjustment. And like we can't deny the fact that Tennessee probably knew if we only play this guy 24% of the snaps, here's the best time to play him in a game. He's now going to have to play in times that maybe aren't the most favorable opportunities for him to win pass rushes, that he's going to have to play more against the run than he played a year ago. But here's the other reason I think it's important more immediately, not just their long-term future. We talked about Chris Jones earlier. He played 83% of the snaps last year, a career high for Chris Jones, who's now getting a year deeper into his 30s. You can't ask Chris Jones to play 83% of the snaps and expect to get the same player for 3 postseason games. The Chiefs aren't a normal team here. They're playing 20 games every season for the last 3 years. And I think asking a player in the regular season to put that much work on them, this is where you need OmarrNorman-Lott to step up and say, I can take some of these snaps from you.
Yeah, they're going to have to get more pressure from their front four. I do think the secondary got better. We'll get to that in a minute, but they've got to be able to get home on just a straight rush, right? Everything can't be a blitz, and that's what these two guys were brought in to do. Jeff, you've already had one snide comment about the contract for the middle linebacker in Nick Bolton. You called it overpaying him.
Yeah.
All right. So what does the big contract mean? What should be expected of Nick Bolton after getting the big payday?
Yeah, I think I'm following your guys' lead on that. You guys were more upset about that move than I was back when it happened. But again, another player. Look, I think we all know who Nick Bolton is and what he brings to the defense and what that decision, what that investment meant to this team's salary cap and ability to make moves in other areas. The thing, well, first, he's got to be healthy. I know he's had issues with that in the past. But two, yeah, I do think he has to be a little bit more of a playmaker. I think anytime you pay somebody a lot of money, that ups the ante. You just can't just be, oh, it's a great second-round pick, Missouri kid, coming in here, making a difference. Like, once that paycheck gets a little higher, you got to look at him a little more. You got to scrutinize it a little bit more, especially now that you got a kid in Jeffrey Bossa you brought in who probably will take Drew Tranquil's spot. But there are flaws that come with Nick Bolton, and we all know what they are. And if those flaws continue, yeah, that contract will be discussed a lot more because there is a part of me that does think that as great as he's been, as much as he's been a captain and a leader and all that stuff, that he can be a liability at times. And you've seen that in games.
I mean, Thaddeus says, I still think Bolton is an extension of the coach on the field. I agree. All you got to do is listen to Steve Spagnuolo talk, and you can tell that he's a big fan of his. And, he talks about, well, he'll get us in the right, get us lined up, or if I make the wrong call, he'll get us into the right call, so that there is a value beyond just his tackles. But Jeff's right. It's not a great coverage linebacker. I mean, he has to be the best version of Nick Bolton, this contract, to look good and for the payroll to work. He has to play at a high level, doesn't he, Sam?
Yeah, and the number one thing is he's got to play. I mean, he's got to play 17 games. Like, it's been a minute since we've seen him make it through a season just completely healthy throughout the entire season. But I mean, look, this is maybe just summarizing what Jeff said, but Nick Bolton is who he is at this point. And I think where he can help maybe a little bit more this year is the Chiefs have more youth on this defense than they had a year ago. And they've got defense that's more youth that's right in front of them. And so I think he can be a help to those two guys we just talked about with Ashton Gelati and OmarrNorman-Lott. That, you talk about him getting people lined up in the right spot. Like, those are two guys who might need that assistance from time to time early on in their career. So I could see the advantage. Maybe it's the non-box score impact that he could have, a little bit more of that this year.
Yeah, he's got to play and play well, because that's a lot of money to give to the middle linebacker spot. Right. And the injuries can't, and he doesn't have like, the nagging, he's out of shape injuries. He has injuries because he flies around the field trying to make plays, but
100%.
Well,
he plays physical. Like, it's a credit to him, actually.
Yeah.
And then think about the running backs they're going to see. Like, last year was who were the Edwards they're going to see. This year they're going to see a lot of running backs who can get out in pass routes and can do damage catching the football, from Saquon to James Cook. J.K. Dobbins obviously signed with the Broncos. Ashton Genty is going to be that guy. There'll be a lot of running backs who are going to challenge what he does on the field.
But that's actually, so I agree with you, Jeff, but I actually think that's one of the things that Chiefs were considering when they did sign Nick Bolton, was something you've talked a lot about, which is, are we going to see more teams just run the ball this year than they've run in the past, because of the teams that had a high success rate in doing it last year, like Philadelphia, like Detroit? Are we going to see more teams do that? In which case, if so, that's Nick Bolton's area. Like, that's his territory if teams decide that they need to implement the run game more.
And is
I'm not using those as pass catchers.
I know what you mean. I'm just added on to
yeah.
it. I think that teams are going to involve their running back just more in the running game this year as well.
But as you know, we know Spagnuolo liked him, but did that make it easier for Brett Veach and Andy Reid to sign off on signing him? Is that they think that's where they think the league is trending, back more to running the ball, and so having a guy like Nick Bolton becomes that much more important?
I think they made the call. I think they knew they were going to lose Reid or Bolton or both, and then they made a call. Who can we get to stay more? And so Bolton being homegrown probably made more sense. But you can't lose both of them playing a defense as complicated as Spagnuolo plays. I mean, we're talking about how he feels about Nick Bolton. He felt the same way about Anthony Hitchens. He loved Anthony Hitchens when he was here. Anthony Hitchens kept Nick Bolton on the bench for a year.
Don't remind me. That was one of the more, and I also had him playing at outside linebacker when he did get on the field. It was one of the more, it really was. I mean, we've come a long way because that was, I'd have to sit in a room for a long time and hear Steve Spagnuolo explain to me why that made sense. But we've come a long way with Steve Spagnuolo since then, because that was a really frustrating time. And I think the fact that you're giving Nick Bolton the contract now speaks to why were you doing that then? It was an issue. I still, that frustrates the hell out of me. But I also think there's a little bit of this, Sam, that this is like still we're not sure about the left side of the offensive line, right? If you knew you had it figured out on the offensive side and you could just boat race people, then wouldn't the defense pay a little bit more of a price, like on this? Like I think Jeff's right. I think you nailed it. We don't want to lose both Reid and Bolton. But I think you've been more willing to do it if you felt like you could hang 40 whenever you wanted to on the offensive side of the ball. And it's been a long time since they felt like that.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that link. I think the Chiefs' decision with Bolton and Trey Smith both comes down to this, which is when you don't have top 10 picks, when you don't have a lot of money to spend on free agency, I think they've decided that, hey, when we do have good players, let's just keep them. Let's just keep our own good players, regardless of position. Now, as you know, I would put more stock into the position they play than I think they did this offseason. But I really think it's that simple. It's tough to get good players when you don't have a ton of cash, when you don't have the best draft capital in the world. So keep the good players you do have. And I really think those two decisions just boil down to that.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think it's fair. We'll see. I don't know. It's a lot of money to put into a linebacker. He better play, and he better
100%. Yeah,
I think that's definitely one of the big keys for this team. Listen, open 24 hours a day. Whataburger with breakfast from 11 p to 11 a, and of course, one of our fine sponsors here at the Red Gold&Bold. Your favorites are back, Kansas City. Now for a limited time at all your KC Whataburger locations, get the mushroom and Swiss burger, 2 large beef patties, Swiss American cheese, fire-roasted mushrooms, and creamy au jus. How about the sweet and spicy bacon burger, 2 large beef patties, American and Monterey Jack cheese, bacon, grilled onions, and topped with sweet and spicy pepper sauce. Or grab the patty melt, even the honey barbecue chicken strip sandwich. They're all perfect with the Whataburger banana pudding shake. Remember, Whataburger's open 24 hours a day with breakfast served from 11 p to 11 a. And don't forget, you can get all your Whataburger favorites and more by downloading the Whataburger app with the QR code. Whataburger, proud sponsor of the Red Gold&Bold podcast. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, proudly serving the greater Kansas City area. Nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor. Locally owned and making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Let Gann educate you about the most cost-effective way to solve your parking lot problems. With free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty, Gann Asphalt keeps your parking lot safer and helps you and your business avoid unnecessary delays and costly expenses. Find Gann online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete. One contractor, all things parking lot. All right, let's talk about what's going on with the loss of Justin Reid. We mentioned losing him and what it meant to lose him. Now, how much is it going to take away from this defense, Jeff?
Well, as I mentioned with the Bolton situation, the communication, the understanding, the trust from Spagnuolo was huge. And they got away with their secondary. The corners took a lot of the pressure, a lot of the abuse when it came to criticizing the secondary. But as Sam has mentioned before, Brian Cook has not been a very good player for them. And as promising as Jaden Hicks is, he's still a young player in his defense, which means he probably can make some of those mistakes that Steve Spagnuolo does not want to see made. Now, I don't know what Mike Edwards has left and some of the other guys who are going to try to make this team, but that, to me, that position is really going to be important to look at because, again, you're going to see a lot of explosive offenses. And if they're not solid at corner, if you have to start moving people around, and we'll talk about corner in a second here, I just think it could be a whole different defense back there. And really, Justin Reid doesn't get enough credit for what he did. I'm one of those people who probably underrated him when it came to some of the things because he didn't make a ton of splash plays that you see some of the other higher profile safeties make in the league. But he got guys in the right places. He was a sure tackler. He could move around and do different things for you, and that will certainly be missed. I think they're way more limited now without him there.
How much do they miss him, Sam?
Yeah, I think they'll miss him. I mean, I think there's a reason that when Steve Spagnuolo got the job in Kansas City, he said, go get me a veteran safety. And they got Tyrann Mathieu, a culture guy, a leader of the defensive backs room. When Tyrann Mathieu was going to age into his 30s, they still wanted that. All those still attributes, like they still valued that. So they get Justin Reid. It's the first time that Steve Spagnuolo will run a defense in Kansas City without a veteran safety in the room. And I do think that matters, but Jeff's right about that. He doesn't make a ton of splash plays, but he's one of the most versatile safeties in the league. And I looked at this up tonight. He played more snaps in the box than any safety in football last year, the most in the league. And he still played 350 snaps at free safety, and he still played 200 snaps at slot. Like, that's where they're going to miss him, is the fact that they feel confident enough that he knows every position to where they can put him whatever's most comfortable for that particular play. And the last thing is Jeff's right. He's a good tackler. I mean, he had the 6th most run stops in the league among safeties last year. I think he had, the 10th best missed tackle rate among safeties last year. Like, he was a valuable and underrated player in Kansas City.
And I would add this too, and I don't want to make it about us in the media and how we deal with people, but there's certain guys you can tell at certain positions that are natural leaders, that bring a charisma to it, that people gravitate to. And he had that. Tyrann Mathieu had that.
Absolutely.
And this group needs that. Because if things start going bad, I think back to when, what was it, 2021, when they had all those busted plays and Tyrann Mathieu's holding his hands up and so people are all over Daniel Sorensen. You need to have guys who can work through that. When you have a lot of young guys or guys who are in contract years or guys trying to figure out where do I fit in all this, that could be hard to deal with without a mature voice in the room.
I know.
A really good point.
I know he doesn't have the experience, but do we know Jaden Hicks isn't one of those guys?
Well, to Jeff's point, like, let me underscore that in this example of a way. When the Chiefs lose a football game, Justin Reid holds court in front of his locker after the game. Yep. And he's the voice of that group to talk about the things that went wrong, the things that they needed to do better. And I don't know that he's Tyrann Mathieu, I think, was a more illuminating player in that sense, but he's just as willing to have those conversations with the media because he knows that talking to us is actually talking to the fans. And Justin Reid has always understood that. And so I think Jeff brings up a good point. Now, I think Trent McDuffie can be that guy. He's terrific with us in that same way. But they had Trent McDuffie last year, and Justin Reid was still that guy holding court. Like, somebody is going to be, if they want that role filled, it will be somebody different that needs to step into it.
Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, conversely, when Eric Berry had that year when he was, week to week and wasn't playing, I think it affected the secondary. I think they had a lot of problems, and their leader wasn't there. And probably had an attitude issue, too, with the coaching staff, clearly. But that stuff behind the scenes can have a much bigger impact. And that's, again, not to say because he talks to us, he's a better person, or Reed or Mathieu, these other guys. But I do think that taking that mantle takes the pressure off the other guys. They can just go about their business.
Yeah, and I think the fans do want to hear from the players about what went wrong. And I think Justin Reid knew that he knew how to say it.
Yeah.
Right? He knew how to not piss the fans off. He knew how to be, like, hey, here's what we didn't do well, without giving away game plans or trade secrets or what have you, but also giving the fans what they wanted to hear after a loss. And I think he knew if he said it, then, the media, us, got our quotes that were necessary for people to write their stories and to have their sound the next day on their radio shows, and for the TV to have their sound bites afterwards. And a guy who had a tough day or wasn't as equipped to say it didn't have to say it. And you didn't get somebody saying something stupid, because you got something that was well said, well put, and you didn't get around to having to ask Marcus Peters. Now, I know Marcus Peters isn't on the team, but I'm exaggerating to make a point. Like, other guys could just kind of fade away because he would step up and get it done. And that's leadership. None of the guys really wants to sit there and answer questions after they lose. Neither does Justin Reed. But he understood the value that he could do it and do it well. And therefore, somebody else could just fade away into the background. And a good representation would be given as to what happened and why they lost.
I totally agree with you. And look, Justin Reed, I recall the year they were playing the Bengals a couple of years ago, the Chiefs were going to Cincinnati, and he made a sly comment about the tight end and said he didn't know his name. And it was felt like he heard from Andy Reid afterwards during that week that that's not how we do things in Kansas City. We don't talk about the other team in any negative. He heard that point, but he was still the guy who was, when the things weren't going well, like he was the guy who, when, to your point, Soren, when nobody wanted to talk, which there are those games, these guys are human, Justin Reid was always available. Yeah. He was always sitting at his lock. If he talked at the podium earlier in the day, still available at his locker laterwards if you had something else you needed from him.
Yeah. He provided a lot of cover for Najee Johnson last year. Najee Johnson had some rough days. I never heard him say a word.
Wow. There's a stray for Najee Johnson out of nowhere.
Sam sees him. He ever talk?
Najee's actually really, like, he's a super nice guy. I talked to him a decent amount last year. I guess I'll say that.
I will say this. I do think Trent McDuffie could be the guy to step up and step in that role.
Yes.
He's got some of those same characteristics. And, that role wasn't open last year. It was Justin Reed's role. Now it's open. And the cornerbacks, I will say this, had better be a strength of the defense, because they're all back and they've added a $10 million free agent and a third-round pick at corner, right? Like, will it be the strength of the defense, Jeff, the cornerback position?
Oh, I wouldn't go that far.
Why?
I think the linebackers would be the strength. Those are the guys I trust the most. I know Bolton. I know Tranquil. I know Chenal's played well. I think Christian Fulton, can he stay healthy? That's a big question. Jalen Watson, I think, is more of a backup. I think he's good as a third or fourth option. I think as a second option, I'm not crazy about that. We have already talked about Najee Johnson. I think Josh Williams is in the same boat. I think both those guys are, past the point of having opportunities to take that job and as a starter and play. Noah Williams is a rookie. And so Trent McDuffie's the only guy that I really trust right now. And look, at this time last year, I think we felt okay about the cornerback situation. It's when training camp started that everything kind of went to hell, right? It was, what's going on here? Who could play? Because all those guys were getting shuffled in and out. Nobody was taking that job once the Jarius Steve was gone. And so to say it'd be a strength, that'd be a stretch. I want to see that first. I'll be open to it, but I wouldn't sit here and say right now that I feel confident in it. No.
Yeah. How about you? Will the cornerbacks be the strength of the defense, Sam?
I actually think their strength this year is they don't have the same glaring weakness if somebody goes down. Last year at this time, all I was talking about was there's no depth on this defense. If somebody gets hurt, they're in trouble. I think they've covered for that a lot better, but nowhere more so than cornerback did they feel that a year ago. Yeah, I mean, you guys remember going into camp, I said they'd sign no defensive players, even though they lost players. And I said, someone goes down, it's trouble. Well, Jalen Watson had a pretty good opening 6 weeks of the season. He's not spectacular. He was solid for the first 6 weeks of the season. When he got hurt in San Francisco, the defense took a nosedive. They started giving up the explosive plays. Buffalo picked on Najee Johnson in Orchard Park. I mean, they struggled defensively. And this year, to your point, Trent, they lost nobody. To me, they gain a healthy Jalen Watson because he was never the same player even when he rushed back. They anticipated he was going to be out for the year. They didn't think they'd get him back at all. He rushes back. He's not full strength. Then they add a third-round pick. Noah Williams did have – I mean, I'm not going to say this like it's a huge deal. He did have an interception today. I just thought people might be interested in that and mandatory minicamp. And then you had Christian Fulton too. And I explained on our last podcast that the significance of Fulton allowing Trent McDuffie to play on the inside and the impact that could have. So I just think that the strength of this group is the fact that they're better protected if something goes wrong, to where last year it was, what now?
Yeah. Depth, I agree. I think the cornerbacks will be a strength for this team. Now,
You said the strength, not a strength.
I think it will be a strength. I think it's got a good chance to be the strength. Because I'm not as convinced, like, what in the track record of Chiefs drafting defensive linemen tells you that, you know, the two guys they drafted are going to be impact guys.
Well, you like Karlaftis, right?
I do like George Karlaftis, but for George Karlaftis, there's Felix Onyedike Uzama. You know, there's Breland Speaks. You know,
Yeah, well, there's Chris Jones.
Yeah.
Not drafted by Brett Veach, right?
Yeah.
So, but look, I just don't think. I think as fans right now, all the rookies are going to be good, right? That's I think for the team, all the rookies are going to be good. We know two of them are going to suck, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
realistically,
If law of averages, yeah.
If two
Five
stink,
more.
yeah, I was gonna say if two stink, they got a good draft class here.
Yeah.
right? But I mean, so like right now, you know, where is it? And it could just as easily be Noel Williams.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
But when they've gone, what's the after Trent McDuffie? What's the next highest corner they've taken?
Let's see. Watson's a 7th round pick. Snead was a 4th round pick.
I think it's L'Jarius Sneed. So Noel Williams will be the second highest corner that's been drafted, certainly under Brett Veach.
Yeah, and they drafted Haddon last year was a 6th rounder.
If you go back, there was the Notre Dame guy they cut in camp because of some.
He was a 3rd round guy, wasn't
Yeah, it was a 3rd round pick. If you go back, but that's under John Dorsey.
he?
Josh Williams was a 4th round pick.
Marcus Peters, was a 1.
Marcus Peters. Yeah, that'd be the other one.
Yeah, you're talking about
But again, that was John Dorsey.
Kavari Russell.
Kavari Russell.
Yeah.
In
That guy
16.
landed anywhere? He just disappeared, huh?
Yeah, I mean their draft to your point, Soren, their draft picks under Brett Veach at that position have been Rashad Fenton in the 6th round, Bo Pete Keys in the 7th round, Jalen Watson in the 7th round, Snead, and so Snead's listed as a safety. Snead in the 4th round. I think I mentioned Josh Williams in the 4th round, Trent McDuffie in the 1st round, Nick Jones in the 7th round.
Nick Jones.
And then Kamal Haddon a year ago in the 6th round.
Yeah. So I mean, I just think it's like they've had some swing and misses up on the defensive line, up higher.
But that also tells you that it's more about the scheme than it's about the player, right? That they think, okay, we can just get the right guy,
I don't know,
arm length,
possibly
slide him in there,
or they as a staff are better at evaluating corners.
I do think they're better. I think they get really good coaching at this position.
Yeah.
Dave Merritt's a very good coach, and I think Steve Spagnuolo coaches corners really well too.
I think so too. So I mean, like for whatever the reason is, right? At the end of the day, though, a couple of guys out of this draft class are going to suck. And more often than not, that's been defensive line than it's been corner.
Yeah. If you're going by the evidence, you should take the over.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
The 2nd and 3rd round pick suck. You really are.
But
you're in
I
trouble.
do what I like. Sorry to interrupt you there, Jeff. I do like about the cornerback position, to quote our friend Eric Eager, like the depth now means that they don't have a hole, right? Like Jalen Watson may not be great. Noel Williams, let's just say he's another Jalen Watson, right? If they've got a bunch of Jalen Watsons around Trent McDuffie, then nobody sucks. There's no guy that you go, here's the scab we're going to pick on, right?
Yeah.
If you allows Jamari Connor to be a safety, and just Fulton and Noel Williams are another Jalen Watson, and you go 3 Jalen Watsons with Trent McDuffie,
You got a good group.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got a good group. Yeah.
Yeah, but those guys, like to the earlier point, those guys are so reliant on the pass rush being good, which has always been Spagnuolo's calling. Spagnuolo's really never had.
I object.
Yeah.
I object to that wholeheartedly. They didn't get home with the pass rush last year, and they were still a top 10 defense.
But they still were what?
They were still a top 10 defense.
Yeah, but they weren't a great defensive backfield. I would argue that all that. Sam could pick up the stats on that one. They were where at explosive plays last year, like 29th or something like that, 28th.
They were 9th in yards allowed and 4th in points.
I'm talking about the real stats. Sam knows.
So the real stats aren't points. The real stats are the DVOA.
We're talking about passing stats. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize the Ravens are 7-time champions because they win the DVOA battle every year.
Go ahead, try it out, Sam. Try out the explosive play stats.
I don't know the explosive plays at the top of my head. Their expected points added per pass, which is what I look at more than yards, is they were 18th and that number a year ago.
Okay, so that's not great by any stretch. That's very mediocre.
And what happened with their pass? What happened with their sack total? Fell off a cliff. It went from second in the NFL down to like 20 something, right?
That's the point I'm making.
22nd in sack percentage and 18th in pressure percentage.
Yeah, but that's my point. They had to cover longer. Everybody gets worse when they have to cover longer, right? I'm not saying they were the best pass defense out there, but I think now they have a chance to be the better pass defense. I have more confidence in the overall depth. Like, how many guys do you think, like Mike Dana didn't get to the quarterback at all, right? Like, to me, I think there's a lot more writing on Charles Omenihu than people realize. I think that's where
maybe, but I've also seen enough of Josh Williams and Najee Johnson and Jalen Watson to know that you put them up against really good players, they're probably going to get roasted.
But if it goes the way it's supposed to go, is Josh Williams even going to get on the field?
No,
I will grant you, if Josh Williams gets on the field, something's gone wrong or somebody's hurt. But if he gets on the field because somebody's hurt, I don't mind Josh Williams as your fifth corner.
Yeah. I mean, but again, you're riding on Christian Fulton staying healthy, and
Just
anything that moves McDuffie out of the slot is going to be a problem. And so that's what I think is the big question. Can they keep him in the slot and trust the guys on the outside to make plays?
By the way, here you go. Maybe the quote of the night. DVOA and OPS can take a bite out of my left cheek.
OPS?
He's down on it.
Who doesn't like OPS?
Come on, man. There it is. He's at it. Tommy Moe has spoken. There it is. All right. Will this defense be elite? Do I get Jeff out of the way?
No.
Do we save Jeff for last?
Well, you need to accurately let's go to our group
chat.
Right.
How do we define elite?
Let's go to our group chat where Jeff suggested this, because you just said, will this defense be elite? Jeff said, can this defense return to being elite?
Yeah.
So you refused to acknowledge they were elite last year. Now it's how can they return?
That's right.
To being elite.
Can we at least point out that at one point last year he did call them elite?
Yeah, they were in the top 5 in yards in the points.
I mean, they were number 4 in points allowed and number 9 in yards.
Yeah,
they were an elite defense last year.
Again,
4th fewest points allowed in the league. How many defenses are elite?
Who were the best defense in the league last year? To me, elite is top 5. So if you want to throw them in there because
they're 4 points allowed.
Four.
I mean,
just say the word elite.
Yeah.
Say it. Come on, Jeff.
I'll say it in regard to the Broncos or the Vikings.
Just 3 teams then.
Yeah, Eagles were elite in the Super Bowl. Okay. That's what elite looks like to me.
Okay. So will they return or stay, whichever way you want to phrase it, Sam, an elite defense?
Well, I was wrong on this a year ago, so I'll point that out. That I think is one of my predictions. It said that I didn't think they'd be a top 10 defense again, because I think it's really hard to be a top 10 defense back-to-back years, because teams spend the offseason finding that one weakness you have in your defense, and they just pick at it and pick at it and pick at it. And
I think oftentimes, just to add on, to throw into what you're saying, I think oftentimes you're elite because you stay healthy, and then you get hurt and you get exposed once you get hurt. You're not likely to be healthy 2 years in a row. I think it kind of plays into your point. I think there's a lot of math behind what you said last year.
Yeah, and then look at what we've talked about during this own podcast right now is we've said, okay, Nick Bolton isn't as great in coverage, that, hey, Brian Cook might be something you worry about a little bit. Who can keep Chris Jones from playing 83% of the snaps this year? those are the same things that, the Chiefs a week ago in their final week of OTAs before this week's mandatory minicamp, they spent a day on each AFC West opponent already. Like their practices are purely based on this is what we think we're going to see from the Raiders. This is what we think we're going to see from Denver and this from LA. So here's what we're going to run. Like when those other teams are doing the same thing, the Chiefs aren't unique in that facet. So those other teams are saying, okay, we might be able to pick at their linebackers in coverage because, I mean, you could see lineups for the Chiefs this year in which case you're like, ooh, yeah, Tranquil, not the best in coverage. Nick Bolton, not the best in coverage. Shamari Connor, if he plays the slot, not the best in coverage. What about potentially beating, Cook deep on a deep ball where we don't think that's maybe his strength as a safety? Like that's what other teams are looking at. That's why it's hard to be really good 2 straight years, is because all that stuff shows up on film at a time where teams have more time to watch, an opportunity to watch film than they have during the course of the regular season. So I realize that's a super long-winded answer, but I think it's tough. Like their bar to get there this year is tougher than it has been for the last 2 years for that reason, is that teams know Steve Spagnuolo's defense better than they did a year ago, a little bit better than they did the year before. And they're relying on a lot more young players, I think, this year than they did those last 2 years too.
The case against it is Chris Jones is getting older and more likely to be hurt, and they lose a lot when he goes down. They lose a lot without him. That's the case against it. Case for it is better depth, better ability to handle injuries along the way.
They do, yeah.
I'd said that they would be elite, again, that they would be top 10. That was one of my bold and daring ones. And I think there's some validity to the idea that, health is going to be a big part of it. I think they're better equipped for it. You make a great point. Does the defense adjust until it gets beaten? I mean, will it adjust before they get beaten? Or do they just keep doing the same thing until then? So, are they vulnerable now to get kind of knocked around because they have been good for 2 years in a row?
Yeah, and I think a lot of what Steve Spagnuolo does is he tricks people. I mean, he's really deceptive with his coverage. And so those are the aspects of this defense that other teams are going to spend a lot of time studying. Now, the last year, he was able to do it in a different way. Like they tricked people in different ways that they had. I mean, Trent McDuffie had snaps where he was lining up at cornerback and playing safety. By the time the ball was actually snapped, like he fooled people in new ways. But he's going to have to do that again this year because I think that this is a defense that Chris Jones is a superstar. But a lot of these other guys, I think, are a product of being surrounded by talent too.
Will they be elite, Sam? Yes or no?
I think I agree with Jeff that I'd say top 5 to 6 is elite, and I don't think they'll finish in the top 5 to 6 in points allowed this year.
So are we calling it top 5 or 6 for elite? Is that what we're saying?
I think like 5 to 7 maybe. Like
I just want to know before I make my answer because I think they're going to be top 10.
I don't think top third of the league you can call a third of the league elite. I think like 5 to 7 maybe you could say is an elite defense. Unless
you've got a John Harbaugh or Mike Tomlin mindset to how you build your team, and with 53% of the money being spent on the offensive side of the ball, 31% spent on the defensive side of the ball, I think it's tough to bet that they will be top 5 just with injuries. I think that's just a bad bet. So I won't bet that they will be top 5. I think they could get there. I think if they're healthy, I think they could get there. Also working against them is it appears that they're going to play much better quarterbacking. Bo Nix should take a step forward. Herbert gets year 2 in the offense, and Geno Smith is an upgrade for the Raiders. So right there in the division, the quarterback play is better overall, and that's a number of games. So statistically speaking, that's going to make it harder. I think they'll be a good to very good defense. I think the season rides on the offense. So I won't say that they will be elite, but I don't think it's impossible for them to be elite. And at the end of the day, Jeff, will you give the Jeff Chadiha elite seal of approval to this defense?
Oh, if they're a top 5.
No, are you going to say that they
No. Are you kidding? Hey, how can you be elite? What part of this defense is elite? We just spent the whole podcast talking about whether all these questions.
I
sat there and say,
Chris Jones is an all-pro. Trent McDuffie's an all-pro.
Yeah, so you got 2 all-pros.
That's pretty good.
There's only 11 in the league, and there's 32 teams, man. How many did somebody have 5?
Denver's got a bunch.
Nobody
the Broncos defense lately?
Nobody has a bunch.
Well, the Broncos have. I think the Broncos probably have. Would you take any defense over the Broncos?
No.
I wouldn't either.
They would have the best defense without the guys they added like this past year. You know,
I wouldn't take any. Yeah, I wouldn't take any defense in the league over the Broncos. But what I'm saying is that can't be the bar because that's number one.
I would say the Broncos. I would say the Vikings. I would put the Ravens in that category with some of the moves they've made. The Chiefs. I was thinking about this when we were talking about the Chiefs' defense. Reminds me a lot of the Bills' defenses of the last few years, where they've had great numbers, but when they played in the playoffs, they weren't great. And so I think there's something to, hey, schematically you can do certain things that make you statistically look great. But I think you know a great defense when you see it play. And a great defense, to me, has guys who scare you. It's guys you cannot handle, guys who can shut you down. And so this defense, Spags is right. Sam's right. Spags got a great bag of tricks, and he can pull them out and do a lot of different things with it. But I think that every year that you're relying on that working and you're relying less on the talent, I think it makes it harder to be elite. And so for me, I think they'll be a good to very good defense. I think that that's fair. But to say they'll be one of the best defenses in the league where they were 2 years ago with Snead and those guys, no, I don't. They're not going to be at that level.
Okay. I mean, are you elite if you give up in the playoffs 22, 23, 22 points? Is that elite? Is that an elite defense?
Well, that's a small sample size.
I know, but
playing against.
You said you'd seen elite.
Yeah, who are you playing against?
And it was the Eagles. Well, that's in the playoffs.
Yeah.
I mean, is that elite? Giving up.
They played elite level defense. That they had 4 turnovers against.
You said you've seen elite defense. And you said like when they get to the playoffs, the Chiefs are like the Bills. When they get to the playoffs, they don't.
No, I said they remind me of the Bills in terms of they've got some good players, some good numbers, but obviously that wasn't an elite defense in the end.
Right. And so I'm asking you.
The real question is how many times will we argue over elite?
During the top 5.
Yeah. I just want this one.
Are we elite at bringing up this elite?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. We are definitely top 5 podcasts at bringing up.
When you go to school, if you get a 3.9, you're elite. If you get a 3.2, you're not elite, right?
So
you're both good students, but one student's like way up here.
If you give up 22, 23, and 22 points in 3 playoff games, is that an elite defense? Yes or no?
Who are you playing against?
Playoff teams.
Okay, if it's Matthew Stafford, Jaden Daniels, and Patrick Mahomes, yeah, that's a pretty good run. Pretty good day.
I mean,
you sniffed out where I was going.
I will.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was just
sniffed out. Yeah. So those are the
best quarterbacks in the league.
I was waiting for you to say no. That's not elite. Yeah. That's not elite. I was gonna be like, well, that was the Eagles. Yeah. And you sniffed it out. You looked it up and you found it where I was going with that. That was the Eagles' last 3 playoff games. So.
Well, I mean, Jeff, you had mentioned that the Chiefs in the playoffs, like the Chiefs' defense was good in the playoffs.
I think they have a.
They said CJ Stroud, 8 times in that game? I mean, Josh Allen had his worst game of the year in the conference championship, and they were the only team to hold down Saquon Barkley. And by the way, the Eagles didn't even what the Eagles finished with, less than 300 yards of offense in their Super Bowl. Now their elite defense beat up on the Chiefs in that game, but the Chiefs defense was good in the playoffs too.
I want to make it clear. I'm not saying the Chiefs defense sucks. I think they're good to very good. If I was grading Chiefs defense, I'd give them an A-. I'd give other defenses an A+. Okay. So I don't think that they're
I agree with the A-. A- is a good grade for them. But I think that's if you're giving out 3 or 4 A+, and that's it.
To Sam's point.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Would I say they're not in the same category as the Denver Broncos, the Minnesota Vikings defense from last year, or even the Texans. The Texans I wouldn't put them in there. Texans have talent. They didn't play up to that talent, but the Texans have way more talent on their defense than the Chiefs have.
To Jeff's point, the Chiefs gave up 14, 29, and 40 in their 3 playoff games. The 40 is misleading because the defense kept them hanging in there for a while. The offense was just such a no-show.
Well, and you had a pick 6 in the game. You had another ball that was turned over inside the 15.
Yep. I don't think anybody thinks
that's called elite defense.
We're turning the ball over inside your own 15.
Yeah. No, he means
forcing the turnover.
He means the Eagles elite defense.
The Eagles.
Yeah.
That's what they do. They make it harder on your offense.
That is elite defense for sure. Yes, I will grant you. Speaking of elite, GAN Asphalt and Concrete is elite with free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. One contractor, all things parking lot. If you own a business or manage a business, if you have any kind of parking lot issues, GAN Asphalt and Concrete. Find them online at ganasphalt.com. Suede Cannabis, if you haven't heard, Best Me Wellness is now Suede Cannabis. Find the location nearest you and shop online at suedecannabis.com. Northland Injury Law, serving Kansas City for more than 40 years, voted Kansas City's #1 accident lawyers. If you've been hurt in an accident, you have a case, text HURT to 22222 or call 816-400-HURT. And for a limited time, Whataburger has some of your favorites back at the Pico de Gallo burger, the sweet and spicy bacon burger, the honey barbecue chicken strip sandwich, and the patty melt, my favorite. Wash it down with Sam's favorite, the banana pudding shake. It's at Whataburger. They're open right now. For Jeff Chadiha and Sam McDowell, I'm Soren Petro saying thank you very much for joining us here on the Red